If you like the sweet science, get ready to talk boxing on the Gloved Fist podcast with top boxing writers Frank Lotiezo and Jack Hirsch. Frank, a former amateur boxer out of Philadelphia, writes for NY Fights and can be seen on the Boxing Channel. Jack, an amateur boxer who competed in the New York Golden Gloves, was a 6-term president of the Boxing Writers Association. And now, here's Frank Lotiezo and Jack Hirsch.
Good morning, fight fans. Welcome to the 13th round. My name is Frank Lotiezo, former fighter, part-time writer, and try to be full-time observer. I hope you had a great weekend. I am shooting from Avalon, New Jersey, down to shore. The weather is beautiful. There's no humidity. It's just been a beautiful weekend, and we're going to discuss some boxing. Let me just touch on why we call this the 13th round. Over the weekend, we had 2 outstanding fights. A heavyweight fight between heavyweights Derek Chisora and Kubrat Pulev. And then later that night, we saw Ray Vargas fight Mark Manceo for the WBC featherweight title. It just so happens to be that both of those fights went 12 rounds. So the 13th round is actually a breakdown and a little bit of a conversation as to what happened. So I'm going to touch on both of those fights. Then I'm going to touch on some news, on some things that caught my attention during the week since we last were together. And then I'm going to go into something that I haven't heard too many people or maybe never heard discussed. I'm going to break down the difference between a boxing historian and a boxing guy. So hang on. Hope you have fun. I'm going to try to do my best, and we're going to have a little fun and learn a little bit. Let's start off with the heavyweights. Everybody likes to talk about the heavyweights. This weekend, we saw Derek Chisora get back in, not the title picture, but in line to get a big fight, maybe with Deontay Wilder. He fought Kubrat Pulev, who prior to the fight with Chisora had only been defeated by a near-prime Vladimir Klitschko and probably a prime Anthony Joshua. They were his only 2 losses. Prior to that, he fought Chisora in 2016, and he won a split decision. Now here we are again. They're both back in the mix to try to become the guy that you have to beat to get a title shot. They fought 12 rounds. It was an outstanding fight. It had me on the edge of my seat. You could make a case that either guy could have won the fight. Chisora won a split decision. He got even with Kubrat Pulev. I don't have a hard time with that decision. It was a give-and-take fight. You can make a case that Pulev landed the cleaner shots, but I think Chisora fought the smarter fight. And you know what's funny? Chisora has basically been an attacker his entire career. He had lost 3 fights coming into this fight. And what I noticed was, as he gets older, you get smarter. We saw that with Larry Holmes was a great example of that. Chisora, who likes to attack and wing it, really fought a different fight. What he did was, in spurts, he fought as the wild, aggressive, attacking Chisora. Landed some shots, got off pretty good. Then he backed up. He let Pulev carry the fight to him. He countered when he had openings, and he probably landed the bigger, more meaningful punches. Although Pulev was definitely the more accurate puncher of the two. It's a split decision. In the heavyweight division, as you see, you can lose 3 fights, beat one name, and you're back in the mix. So Chisora is in line for a big fight next. I don't think Pulev is out of the deal because it was a split decision. And in the heavyweight division, you need good fights. And Pulev will not be somebody that anybody will take lightly the next time. He still has a name because he didn't embarrass himself. I'm sure he thinks he won the fight. And again, it could have gone either way. But let's talk about Chisora. Chisora looked pretty good winning the fight. He's not done yet. If you look at his record, he has become the George Zavallo of the heavyweight division, where he has fought everybody. He doesn't beat the elite guys, but he gives them a run for their money. And on any given night, he's capable of beating any of the upper tier guys. I'm not going to say he would beat Fury. He already fought Usyk, and he would not beat Joshua. But aside from those guys, he's a live underdog. He's exciting. He always gives the fans what they want, a great fight, and he's a crowd pleaser. Look at his record. He went the distance with Vitaly Klitschko, who was at his best. He fought David Haye. He fought Dillian White twice. He fought Tyson Fury twice. He fought Joseph Parker twice. He fought Usyk. He fought Pulev twice. Carlos Takam, David Price, all big names. And on any given night, you never know. He can land and get lucky, but he's always going to be a crowd pleaser and a guy that we want in the heavyweight division because he provides good fights. He likes to fight. He likes to give the fans what they want. Here's my problem. They're talking about him perhaps fighting Deontay Wilder next. Deontay Wilder, to me, could lose to anybody on a given night because he's just so bad fundamentally. But I think it's a bad matchup for Chisora. Wilder can really hit with the right hand. Chisora is there to be hit. I could see Wilder catching him and stretching him. I hope he wouldn't get hurt. It'll be a big money fight. And the other wild card regarding the fight is, we haven't seen Wilder since November of last year. This is now the middle of July. We don't know what that last Tyson Fury fight took out of him. I'm going to assume the guy can punch, go into his grave. That's about, he'll always be able to do that. But he and Chisora would be a good fight. I hope that if Chisora gets the fight, it's for a lot of money. I could never pick him to win. I would hope he wouldn't get hurt. But I know one thing. He would have no qualms going in there and trading with Wilder, and he could get lucky because I believe he hits harder than Tyson Fury, and he could knock Wilder out if he caught him. So, Chisora gave us an excellent fight. He doesn't have a great record. He's 33-12 with 23 knockouts. But you know what? When you fight the best guys, you're not going undefeated. Has he beaten many elite guys? No, but he has always been in the mix, and there is a place for him in this sport. Let's just hope he doesn't push too far and ends up being hurt. I hope it doesn't end that way. I wouldn't count on it, but we're going to be interested in his next fight, and he and Wilder will probably get together because it makes sense for both. Okay, we'll put Chisora to bed. Again, great fight. Probably the George Zavallo of this era. He hits harder than Zavallo, but he's not as durable. He doesn't have as good a stamina, but he's in the mix, and on any night could be one of the upper tier guys. Later that night, Saturday night, we saw Ray Vargas, 36-0, 22 knockouts, fight Mark Manxeo, 21-1, who was undefeated going in. Both were undefeated going in, 16 knockouts. Now think about Vargas. Vargas is a Mexican fighter, but he doesn't fight like a Mexican fighter. He fights more like an American boxer who maybe came out of the Olympics. He fights tall. He fights behind the jab, uses his height and reach, sets up the range, tries to disrupt you coming in. But if you want to mix, He'll do that. He went to the body well. And I'll tell you what, he fought a really smart fight with Magsayo this past weekend. Both guys came out throwing bombs. I can't remember a fight where I saw two guys lead with so many left hooks. And yes, the commentators made me crazy because they were talking about the Fugazi punch called the check hook. The check hook is a counter hook, or basically a counter hook after the other guy's thrown. But they both let off with a lot of hooks. It was an outstanding fight. Vargas fought behind the jab. 1-2s, hook to the body. Magsayo could not get inside, which he wanted to do. And incidentally, Freddie Roach, who I think is a great trainer, had a bad night. I don't think he gave Magsayo very good advice. All he kept on saying was, you're the bigger, stronger guy. Go get him. He didn't really tell him how to get in there, how to disrupt Vargas's momentum and his style. But he did have a close call in the 9th round because he dropped Vargas with a nice right hand in the 9th round. Vargas was clearly hurt. It was the best round for Magsayo. He won that round, and it looked like he might build some momentum after that. And you could make a case with a knockdown after 10 rounds. The fight was pretty much up for grabs. But Vargas put on a clinic in the last 2 rounds. He fought smart. He didn't come in with the uppercut that he was leading with. He got countered with a few times and hurt. He boxed, used his reach, but he did go after whatever it was that Magsayo gave him. He took, but he didn't take anything for granted. But it was a good showing by Vargas. He's now a 2-division champ. He's undefeated. There's talk of him fighting. Maybe he's going to fight Leo Santa Cruz. That would be an exciting fight. There are a lot of fights for him down the road, but it was a good weekend of boxing. We only had the 2 main fights, as I said, Chisora, Pulev, and Vargas and Magsayo. Now, there was a guy on the undercard, a lightweight named Frank Martin, southpaw. He's 25 years old. He was a wrestler in high school. He played football. We know the guy's an athlete. He's picking up this sport outstandingly well. I think he's a guy to be heard from. He looked great this weekend, scoring a 9th round stoppage. And I think we're going to hear from Frank Martin. And there is even talk about him maybe meeting Ryan Garcia down the road. That would be an interesting fight. I don't even know who I'd go with there. I might go with Frank Martin. So that pretty much wraps up the action, the elite action, the top flight action that we saw this weekend. So it was a good weekend of boxing. Now, there were some things this week that I noticed in the news that caught my attention that I want to touch on. Now, everybody knows the big fight coming up in September is Golovkin against Canelo. They fought twice. The first fight was a draw. I don't know anyone who thought Canelo won or didn't, or that Golovkin didn't win. I had Golovkin winning 8-4, but it ended as a draw. They fight again a year later. Canelo wins a decision this time. I had him winning by a point. But if you noticed in the news this weekend, or not this weekend, probably since the fight's been signed a couple weeks ago, these guys are really trading barbs and really going at it and taking shots at each other. And I think it's legit. I don't think it's to sell tickets. I think Golovkin feels horrible that he thinks he got screwed twice against him. He has no wins to show for it. And if you think about it, Canelo has become a star since he's basically undefeated, fighting Golovkin 2 times. But Golovkin said something interesting this week, and I actually think it goes against him. He said Canelo looks better since their last fight because of the opponents he's fought in comparison to me. That got me thinking. So I went back and I looked at the guys they both fought since their last fight. Golovkin is 4-0, Canelo 7-1. Canelo has defeated Rocky Fielding TKO 3, Daniel Jacobs decision, Sergey Kovalev KO 11, Callum Smith decision, Evgeny Yildirim fight was stopped after the 3rd round, Billy Joe Sanders, fight was stopped after the 8th round. Caleb Plant, he stopped in the 11th, and then he lost a decision to Bivol. Now, let's compare that to the guys that Golovkin has fought. He's fought 4 times since Canelo, 4-0. Steve Rolls, KO4. Sergey Deverenchenko, unanimous decision. Some people thought he lost that fight. Kamil Zermata, fight was stopped after the 7th round. And in his last fight, he fought Royo Murata and stopped him in the 9th after some shaky going early in the fight. Now, if you go by that, Canelo has clearly fought the better opposition since they last fought, and he's had better spurts. But everybody is thinking about, well, he lost his last fight to Bivol. He didn't look good, but what they're forgetting is he moved up a full weight class against the guy who was the consensus second best guy in the division after Arturo Beterbiev. Canelo was outboxed. We've known all along, Canelo's the type guy, when we see him get beat, he's going to lose a decision because he can be outboxed. He's not good with guys that pick up their feet and use their jab. That's Dimitri Bivol. That's what he did. Bivol fought a perfect fight. Golovkin is the same guy every time out. He's an attacker. He has to bring it. He's going to have to bring it against Canelo this time for 2 reasons. Because he's going to have to beat him up a little bit to slow him down, because even though both guys have run out of gas late, Canelo, I think, is a little bit more comfortable at 168. I don't think his gas tank has been a problem. So I think that favors Canelo. And here's the other thing. In the back of Triple G's mind, he has to think, what do I have to do to get the decision? I better beat him up really bad. And he did beat him up pretty good the first time, and he still didn't get the decision. And I had said then, if Golovkin does not beat Canelo the first time they fight, he'll never beat him, because after that, age is going to be a factor, wear and tear. Golovkin's 40 years old. He's not getting better. And I knew that after their first fight, if he couldn't steal a win then, it would be harder, exponentially harder. And I believe that's what's in play here. But I also think the fact that Canelo is coming off a loss, it's a little bit easier to picture him losing. Again, the problem is Golovkin doesn't fight anything like Dimitri Bivol, but he does have a good jab. That's something that Bivol did use smartly in the fight. But Bivol set him up and pushed him back with the jab. But once he had him in the corners or on the ropes, he didn't try to fight him. He'd step back and he'd make them start over, and they would box again. Golovkin doesn't do that. So I think it's fun to watch these guys go at it and take shots at each other in the media. I think it's going to be a big fight, and I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that now Golovkin seems unbeatable. And I think that'll create a lot of interest, because I don't care what anybody says. A lot of people root against Canelo. They look at him as the chosen one, and that's pretty much it. Now, I see Max saying that, how about comparing him to Foreman? You know, Mac, that's an interesting conversation, but here's the difference. Even though Foreman and Golovkin were basically attackers, Golovkin is the better technical fighter than Foreman. However, what Foreman had in his favor, no other fighter in history has ever had. Foreman was a physical freak of nature. You know, to this day, George Foreman still doesn't punch correctly as far as how it says by the book. He punches with his arms. He doesn't get his body and his hips and shift his weight like other guys did. I've always said if young Foreman fought technically smart, it would be illegal to let him fight human beings, because he's still, to this day, the strongest and most powerful heavyweight champ who has ever lived. And I have said for a long time that the GOAT debate was settled the night that Ali and Foreman fought in Zaire back in '74, because had Foreman won in 8 rounds instead of Ali, Foreman today would be regarded as the greatest heavyweight champ of all time. He'd have knockout wins over Ken Norton, Ron Lyle, Joe Frazier, and Muhammad Ali. Go try and find another heavyweight who can make that claim. And we also saw the fact that he didn't fight for 10 years, and he came back 20 years after Ali beat him, and he won the lineal title against a guy who was undefeated named Michael Moore. So the strength factor is there, Mac. The difference is George Foreman is much more of a freak of nature, and he had such an abundance of strength that he could lose 30% from the champ we had in the 70s, and he's still 20% ahead of everybody else in his 40s. So that wraps up Canelo and Golovkin. Again, we're going to see a lot of things said between now and then, but let's make it clear. Since their last fight, Canelo has looked better and has defeated better opposition. Moving on. Did you see the two football players, Adrian Peterson and Le'Veon Bell, have signed to fight wearing 12-ounce gloves? I see that Bell was listed as a 2-1 favorite. And this goes back to what we touched on a little bit last week, where Max Kellerman had said a while back that if you had a football game on one corner, a baseball game on one corner, a basketball game on the other, and a fight on another at an intersection, and all the cars would pull up and all the people would go out and they would go to the fight, and they would not look at the football game, basketball game, or baseball game until the fight was over. And I don't care if they're doing martial arts, boxing, wrestling, whatever. If it's two men and they're combating each other, that's what's going to be watched. And the funny thing is, I see these football players, they want to get into boxing and fighting. And it's just so funny how football players, and not just football players, everybody thinks they can fight because they have been in some type of altercation. But as we've seen, not many football players have made it in boxing. Tex Cobb was okay. Charlie Powell was okay. Too Tall Jones was a joke. Mark Gastineau was a joke. So there's just a different strength in football and boxing. And it makes football players think, well, I'm big, I'm strong, I'm tough, and I can punch. And that's not the case. And I'll touch on this another time, why I think that to be a good boxer takes more skill, actually, than it does to compete in MMA. And most football players would do better in MMA than they would boxing. However, we're down to about 7 minutes left, and there's something I want to get to. I can touch on these other things later, but I want to touch on this because I thought about it for a long time. What is the difference between a boxing historian and a boxing guy? Here's how I break it down. And I'm going to take the biggest name in the history of the sport, Muhammad Ali, and I'm going to use him just as an example. A boxing historian could tell you how many times Muhammad Ali fought in Madison Square Garden, how many fighters he fought with a losing record, how many fighters he fought that were southpaws, how many fighters he fought in Louisville, how many decisions he won, how many he lost, how many knockouts he has, what he weighed at his heaviest, what he was at his lowest. They could tell you maybe about his training camp, how many times he trained in Pennsylvania, Louisville, Vegas, whatever. That's a boxing historian. They could give you his title bout record, 22-3. They could measure that against Joe Lewis's, Jack Dempsey's, Mike Tyson's, Joe Frazier's, whoever. That's a boxing historian. What's a boxing guy? Here's the way I break down a boxing guy. Okay, let's just say, using Ali again to make it the most simple, let's just say the night that he fought Joe Frazier the first time, you were best man at a wedding, or you got married that day, or someone close to you passed, and you couldn't see the fight that night. But you wanted to know what happened, even though you couldn't see it. And in the case of Ali Frazier, the fight wasn't aired for years after the live event. Unless you want to see it closed circuit or attended it live, you just had to read about it because they didn't even have blow-by-blow coverage of it. So the question is, you missed the fight. You can only call one person who you believe can tell you exactly what happened in the fight and break it down. Not who won more rounds. You're allowed one call. Who would that guy be? Would it be John Jones, Steve Smith, whoever? But the boxing guy is the guy that can tell you not just did Frazier won more rounds and Ali gave a lot of rounds away laying on the ropes. The boxing guy could say, Frank, Ali lost 3 rounds because he clowned on the ropes. However, he clowned on the ropes because Frazier set a pace that wore him out, and he had to pace himself. And that's why, even though he went to the ropes acting like it was his con, no, he was conserving his energy because the pace got to him, and he knew he'd have to go 15 rounds. And if he fought all out, he wouldn't go 15 rounds. The boxing guy would be able to say, Frank, Joe Frazier cut that ring off on Ali. He smothered his punching room. He made him either hold, which nobody wins, fight, which is what Frazier wanted, or Ali would have to dance away and move, which expended his energy. The boxing guy would be able to tell you, Frank, Joe Frazier's style is really hard for Ali because he gets so low that he forces Ali to punch down. Well, there's nothing that fighters hate doing more than punching down at a moving target. So the boxing guy would tell you not just the result or who won more rounds. To me, the boxing guy is the guy that can tell you why it happened. Look at Lennox Lewis against David Tua. David Tua talked tough. I'm going to throw 100 punches around. I'm going to hit him so many times that the only part I'm not going to hit are the bottom of his feet. I'm going to set a pace that he can't keep. And what happened when he got in the ring? After the second round, he felt Lewis's power, and he realized the guy can hurt me. And this is a guy that has a concrete chin in Tua, but he realized he could be hurt. He can't be careless because if he tries to throw 100 punches around, he's going to get hit himself, and he can't take that chance. So what does he do? He kind of waits and reacts and only punches when he thinks it's safe. Well, anybody could tell me that Lewis virtually pitched a shutout, but why? Tua didn't go in the ring that night and decide, this is the biggest fight of my life. I'm not going to throw many punches. I'm just going to take it easy and just fight methodical, and I'll wait for Lennox to make a mistake and hopefully catch him. No. Tua's mindset was to set a pace and to just steamroll Lewis. But once he got in there, he realized he couldn't do it because what came back at him put a little fear in him, and it gave him trepidation. So it's not like Tua decided to stink that night or not be aggressive. Lewis had something to do with it. So again, the boxing historian can tell you what happened, who won, where they fought, how much they weighed, how it was scored. The boxing guy who I enjoy talking to more is the guy that can tell me why they won, how it got to be that way. Why was it that Frazier could cut the ring off on Ali and Ali couldn't get away from him? I don't want to hear that Ali went to the ropes and he gave rounds away. No, Ali didn't go into the fight with the idea, I'm just going to play with Joe and I'm going to give him 3 rounds because I can handle him with no problem. So to me, personally, I believe almost anyone could be a boxing historian. You got to be able to read and retain. If you can do that, then you'll be a great boxing historian. And believe me, there are plenty of them around today. However, I'm not sure the boxing historian can do what the boxing guy can do. I'm not sure he can pick up some of the nuanced things that happen in a ring, the unspoken language between 2 fighters in a big spot. I'm not sure he can do that. And to me, I want to know about boxing and fighting. I can go read a book. I'm a pretty good historian, especially with my era when I started following boxing in '64 through now. But I can't really speak on authority about Joe Louis and Max Schmeling. Sure, I've seen the fight. I know what happened. Louis made a great adjustment in the fight. But I want to know, well, what changed? What did he do different in the rematch that he didn't do in the first fight? In essence, what he did was he took away Schmeling's room and he crowded him so Schmeling couldn't get that right hand off, and Louis got his off inside and he hurt him. So that'll pretty much do it. I've always wanted to talk about the difference between a boxing historian and a boxing guy. I hope I broke it down nice so you can understand it. Next week, I'm going to discuss one of my favorite terms, the cookbook boxing analyst. If I call you a cookbook analyst, I don't think highly of you. That'll do it for the 13th round. My name is Frank Lotiezo. See you next week. Thanks for tuning in.
Frank, another great job, and we'll see you all during the week. And next week we'll go live again. We'll see you tonight. He'll be rebroadcast, but we'll see you again next week with his live broadcast. Those who tuned in, thanks for coming in. And Frank, share it well. Have a great day, buddy.
Thanks, Mac.